Welcome to the 45th episode of the Animal Riot podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. I'm Katie Rainey, filling in for Brian Birnbaum while he's taking some time off. This is our first episode of 2020, and I am so happy to have with me here today one of the biggest advocates for the literary community, Andrew Lloyd-Jones. Andrew has spent more than 15 years in the marketing and advertising industry and was a creative partner at the occasionally infamous HHCL and Partners in London. Curious about that. Today, he specializes in copywriting, branding, and creative direction for global clients and local brands alike. His services include advertising copy, web content, and brand messaging, to name a few. But most importantly, Andrew is an award-winning short story writer and won the Fish International Short Story Prize, which is a pretty huge deal. I've entered that competition several times and never won. With his story, Feathers and Cigarettes, recently adapted for film, I have so many questions. His fiction has been featured in Blue Lake Review, Pop Shot Quarterly, The London Reader, Northern Colorado Writers Pooled Ink Anthology, and the Canongate Collection Original Sins, among others. He's the founder, producer, and host of the regular live fiction reading series and podcast Liars League NYC in New York. Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
Hello.
Does that make you really uncomfortable to hear all that?
Unbelievably uncomfortable. Ordinarily, I'm introducing other people and at Liars League, and so I don't think I've ever heard anything like that. So thanks very much.
I promise I won't. I'll try to make this as painless as possible.
I appreciate it.
You don't like talking about yourself. We just learned that.
I've just learned that, to be honest with you. I never thought that I didn't like talking about myself, but apparently I don't. So, yeah. This might be a very short interview.
Okay, well, we'll see. Well, you can just make it more of a conversation.
Great.
We'll try. But I do want to learn more about you.
Sure.
Originally, you are from London.
That's correct. Yes, I was born in London.
And you lived in Alaska for a while. You moved to Alaska from London?
That's correct. When I was very young, my parents shipped us all out to the States. So
without them?
No.
Oh, you said they shipped you.
Like no, they didn't ship me. Yeah, they hated me so much. I was some changeling baby. No, we all moved out. They shipped us all out with them to the States. So we were in California for a brief time, and then Alaska.
Were they in the military or something, or just for work?
No, worse than that. It's oil. So So
what? So
BP.
Okay, all right.
BP, yeah.
What did they do for BP? No,
well, it wasn't they. It was my dad. He was in human resources personnel. Yeah. So,
wow, that's a big move for.
Yeah, well, I guess they had they just discovered oil in the North Slope of Alaska, and which at the time was very exciting, and now it's absolutely catastrophic for the environment. But so my dad spent a lot of time in the Arctic, I think, on oil rigs and things like that, interviewing people for jobs.
So when did you come to New York?
I moved here just about 11 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd been living in London prior to that.
What made you move to New York?
It's a good question. I'd fallen in love with New York sometime before that, and I used to have friends here, and I would come over once or twice a year just to hang out for a week at a time, and I was particularly enamored of Halloween.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, Halloween doesn't really exist in the UK, and maybe this is because I grew up in the States when I was younger, and I left the States when I was 10 years old. So I was in fourth grade or something like that, and Halloween's obviously big business if you're 10. That's kind of you look forward to that as much as you do Christmas. And so I used to love Halloween, and then I came to England and it just doesn't exist. There's some sort of quaint notion of bobbing for apples that happens something like that. That's about it. And
that breaks my heart a little bit.
I know. It is heartbreaking. I know, it's terrible.
That's probably the most American thing I'll say all day. You don't have Halloween. God.
There you go. Yeah.
But yeah.
So when I came to New York, and it just, I think for the first time, which as an adult, which is in the early 2000s or something like that, I coincidentally happened to be here at Halloween, and I was just blown away at the sort of childlike enthusiasm people have for it here, and it genuinely does seem to be a creative outlet for anyone. It doesn't matter if you're in the arts or if you're working on Wall Street or, if it doesn't matter, everyone embraces the sort of the chaos and the creativity of it all and their sort of inner child. And yes, there's sort of slutty nurses and, things like that. But I think it's all part of the fun of it. I think you're allowed to kind of dress up however you like. And nobody really nobody's shaming anyone. No one's judging anyone for being anything at Halloween. It's just this kind of fantastic holiday that incidentally also, it just involves your friends. You don't get together with family for Halloween, so it's very much a sort of friend type occasion. Thanksgiving is for family, and then Christmas, if you celebrate it, is for, family plus presents and things like that. And but Halloween is just friends and drinking, so yeah. So anyway, so I was here for that Halloween, but I love New York, and as the catchphrase goes, and it felt more and more like home. And then one Halloween, in fact, while I was here, I met a girl at a party, and she and I got involved in a long distance relationship, and I moved over. So a year later.
All right.
So yeah.
Well, so we met, when was that? Like a couple years ago? Did we meet the first time at your house? Was that the first time?
Might have been at my house. It might have been.
You threw a party for reading series curators, and I think that was the first time we met. I just showed up with, I think you had invited like Devin, my co-host.
You didn't come to the one on the roof?
No, I was there on the one on the roof. That's when I first met like Tobias and Dolan Morgan, and I think it was your house. I think that was the first time I met you.
Okay, I think I've had a couple of reading series parties. Yeah, that was a sort of a party and that wasn't my idea, that first party, the one on the roof. That was Nancy Hightower, who is my collaborator at Liars League a couple of years ago. She had this great idea of, trying to bring together, everyone. This is before the Reading Series of New York group existed. Wanting to kind of cross-pollinate, collaborate with other reading series, which now seems like a no-brainer. And now that the Reading Series of New York group exists, it just seems obvious. Why weren't we doing this before? Because there are so many reading series out there and groups that, can benefit from each other's experience and contacts or whatever it might be. And in fact, that's why I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah, I know, because we met. And even that first party, I met so many great people and that's just how we became friends with like Tobias and all of them. And I think like Natalie Eilbert was there and several other people. Right. And it was really great. But then we didn't really have a lot of contact until the whole Reading for Races thing happened. And so like I don't know if we've talked about that before on this podcast, but maybe we have. Like a few years ago, a bunch of curators just got together, like you said, and said like, why aren't we doing more things? And so we decided to fundraise together for Races. I can't remember. Races. Yeah. I'm from the South, which helps families and children who are detained at the border. And so we fundraised across, and that was really excellent. You hosted the closing celebration, which was kind of when we all decided to like form this more like formal community of curators who are working together. It's been really lovely so far.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And I know there's been a lot of enthusiasm. And I think I'm an admin on the Facebook group, I think, and I'm always amazed that there are sort of several requests every week from other people from reading series that I've never heard of to join the group, and which is awesome. I mean, the fact that there's so much out there. Incidentally, I mean, that's certainly something that it wasn't a reason for my moving to New York, but when I eventually got involved with the literary community, having moved to New York, I was amazed at how many reading series exist here. And, whether it's for fiction or poetry or, drama or whatever it might be, there isn't a fraction of that amount of organization in London, which is bizarre. You'd think, London, literary city, kind of long literary pedigree, but yeah, I think we're just massively antisocial in London. We just don't trust each other.
I'm curious about there's tons of people here, and there's just easy access to like each other and meeting in public and that kind of things. Because there's really not like reading series communities elsewhere. Like I'll go to. Like we just started a salon in Little Rock, which there's nothing else. Out in California, there's like a couple in LA, but they're sporadic, and they're mostly like the ones we've heard from are started by people who like came from the East Coast, like New York. Like Ryan Sartor is out there doing the Difficult to Name series that he took from New York out there, and so things like that. I guess I'm wondering I don't know. This is such like a home for the reading series community. It's great.
Very much so. Yeah, like you, I know of very few other places in the world. I think Portland has, a few literary kind of events happening at any one time. And San Francisco has Litquake, and I think they are connected with a lot of literary organizations, but the sheer number every week, every night, in fact, there's some literary event going on, and which can be incredibly depressing when you're trying to program your own events. I'm sure you've clashed with other literary events.
Every
Dead
time.
Rabbits.
Yeah.
And, I'm always conscious when there's only a relatively small audience for Liars League, that something else is happening somewhere that's kind of dragging people away. So, which is amazing. It's great for everyone. And it does cause log jams, though, when you have things like the Brooklyn Book Festival happening and, when everyone's trying to hold events on the same night and things like that. So it's a nice problem to have. Yeah.
So speaking of Liars League, let's talk about that. Where does the name come from? How did it start?
So the name comes from, the name was originally, I think it was a guy called Tim Aldrich's name. He came up with it, and he had been chatting with another friend of mine, Katie Darby, who's a writer who I actually met via the Fish Prize. I think she came in, she was one of the runners-up, and so she and I met in Ireland when we were there for the big award ceremony.
Oh, great.
So they had come up with this kind of vague concept and this name, Liars League, for a reading series that just had actors and writers. And the idea was that actors would read the work what writers had submitted. So they then approached me, another writer called Tom McKay, and I think he was more of an actor, actually, Tom, and Michael Keynes, who at the time was at the Times Literary Supplement. And the six of us got together. We became the original Liars League. And we took submissions, we had auditions for actors to read, and we held our first Liars League. I think it was in a pub, the top room above a pub on Lamb's Conduit Street in London. I think it was called the Wheat Sheaf. Yeah, and it proved incredibly successful. I think one of the reasons for that, A, was that, I still think it's a great idea, and B, there aren't, as I said, as many literary events happening in London as there are here. So we were one of, I don't know, half a dozen reading series in London. I might be completely wrong about that, and that certainly might have changed now. But back then, it was not a crowded field. Yeah. So,
Well, it gives it a level of sophistication having actors read writers' work. Is that kind of what the thought was behind that?
Yeah, I think the thought was twofold. I mean, I don't know if we were as judgmental as, wanting readings to be, sophisticated or anything like that. I think it was more a sense that, writers write. I mean, I came up with that strapline originally, writers write, actors act, audience listens, everybody wins, which I still use here in New York. And because that really sums it up, and writers are good at writing. They don't have to be good at reading their work. And not all writers like doing that. And, I think we've all been to readings where, some writers got up and, mumbled into the mic, and it's just been, atrocious. And it's got nothing to do with the writing. And
it's a completely different skill.
Right, completely. And so the idea was really to level the playing field, and actors are good at reading and writers are good at writing, so let's everyone play to their strengths. So that was the idea behind it. And it was only years later when I came to New York and I set it up here. It took me a while to set it up here, actually, because I was so intimidated by all the kind of literary events happening. And I just thought, people started talking to me about monetization and things like that, Yeah, and that was, so it felt immediately like a more professional pursuit in the States. And so when we set it up here, and at the time, that was, again, there was a kind of a collection of us kind of got together to set up Liars League. Primarily with an actor, a director, a friend of mine, Elizabeth, who's the artistic director, and she was really in charge of, finding the actors and sort of running the rehearsals and all of that. And she's been fantastic at that. Yeah, no, it felt like a more intimidating prospect, setting up a reading series in New York.
Where do you find these actors? That's what I'm curious about.
That wasn't my area of expertise. So that was Elizabeth Alice Murray, who was the artistic director. And, she, being an actor and coming from that community, knew of a lot of actors. And, actors, it sounds ridiculous, but actors love acting. Yeah. And, it's an amazing thing where you can talk to actors and they are absolutely willing to come along and record a story written by somebody else and have the opportunity to really bring that to life in front of an audience. It's what actors love doing. And I've always been amazed at, how willing people are to kind of get involved, and which has been great.
I guess it's like a credential for writing too, right? Like submitting your work and getting it read aloud is a credit to your name, and then also performing someone else's work. I mean, and then getting it recorded on a podcast, you can use that for your career, your reel, to share your talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been lots of reasons why I think it's worked as a concept. And, it's partly because, we function as a journal as well. We publish online. And in addition to having the recordings, which are on their website, and then their podcast as well.
Who's doing all this work?
So, well, it's a kind of a joint effort more than anything else, I think. So it really just depends on who's doing what. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's someone else. But there's sort of a lot of work that goes into it.
So it's a live journal and a podcast as well as a live reading. Or it's a journal and a podcast as well as a
That's
live
right.
reading.
Yeah. So in fact, I mean, the journal aspect of it, I think is, has been fascinating for me. I mean, it wasn't something, again, until I moved to New York. London doesn't have the same kind of MFA culture that New York does, where you've got a lot of writing, former MFA students, and who are all writing short stories and pitching short stories and submitting short stories to journals. So, we're essentially in competition, for everyone else, and along with everyone else. And, and I think that there is a sort of a hierarchy of publication, that starts with your own blog.
Yeah.
And, ends with The New Yorker. Or, well, you could argue, I don't know where it ends, but, some people might say it ends somewhere a bit more. I don't know, actually. Where would you say that hierarchy ends?
Oh, I mean, probably that Oprah book sticker, book club sticker, getting that big fat paycheck, really.
An anthology.
I don't know if
short
it's a place.
It's with more, your name on it, with the Oprah book club on it.
Yeah, just something that sells copies. So I guess for me, like publishing a novel, but like also selling those novels.
But as far as the submitting short stories go, where does what's the top?
Yeah, I guess the New Yorker,
the Atlantic,
New Yorker.
But then there are sort of Paris Review. I don't know. There are sort of others sort of underneath it that follow hard after. And so I became aware that there was this hierarchy existed, and we were somewhere on it. And to a certain extent, as a publisher, I don't know if you find this as well, because you publish short stories too, right? Yeah. You're constantly looking to effectively move up the rankings, move up. And so I'm always delighted when someone submits a short story to us that I think, wow, this could get published in somewhere higher up.
Do you tell them that?
They think, no, God, no. I would say, no, you wouldn't want to say that. But I kind of, I find that that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for that as speaking as an editor.
I know, I asked because I know a small press publisher who you probably know as well, who has received books before that he felt were way above his press and could be published bigger, and he tells them that.
Really?
And so Brian and I, as new publishers, have had that debate in which my thought was like, maybe it's a conversation. Brian's like, no. He said the same reaction that you did. No, we publish it.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think that, I think it's, you're right. Ethical. It's an ethical dilemma to a certain extent. A moral dilemma.
Sort of, not really.
Not really.
But yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it is. But I think that's what everyone does. And
because there's also the question of like the landscape, like even if you think it should be published somewhere else, it may not,
This is it. Yeah.
That may not
comes
happen.
Down to your own tastes, right?
Yeah.
And, I don't know if there's a sort of, but I think we all know really when, you receive a short story, kind of, to a certain extent it's subjective, but there are, like, say, take the Pushcart prizes. If you flick through their anthology, there's a certain standard that you become used to. And you think like, okay, this is where, you need to be hitting if you want to be published in Tin House or RIP or, somewhere of that caliber. And so when you sort of receive a short story, and one hopes that one is writing that type of quality as well. And I mean, I guess that's interesting as well, because you always think like, yes, this could be published in the New Yorker, that this story that I've just written, and then it's only when you get 50 rejections back that you realize, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll pitch it at my mate's blog instead. Maybe I'm at that point on the hierarchy. That's number 2 on the hierarchy. Number 1 is your own blog, and then it's your mate's blog. So yeah, anywhere above number 2 is good.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so you guys are at KGB Bar.
We are at KGB Bar.
Did it start at KGB Bar in New York?
We did. We were really lucky.
Yeah.
One of the sort of Liars League New York founders, her name is Lila Cecil. She was also one of the co-founders of the reading space Paragraph.
Oh, yes.
So Paragraph...
We've had them on this podcast.
Oh, fantastic. You had Joy on?
I had Joy on, yeah.
Oh, Joy's lovely. So, yeah, Paragraph have had a reading series at KGB for years, I think ever since they set up. And so Lila was kind enough to introduce me to the owner of KGB, who gave Liars League a home, and we've been there ever since.
Yeah.
And enjoyed their kind of crumbling architecture and their terrible lighting and sound system and everything like that. But it's a fantastic kind of literary space, and in New York, and it has that sort of sense of history. And whenever we tell anyone that we're at KGB, everyone kind of goes like, oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah,
kind of
it is.
So,
for those folks listening who are not in New York, it's definitely the most, I think, now the longest running kind of literary space, I feel like.
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's spaces like Housing Works. I'd put in that kind of...
But KGB literally is just a bar that has literary events every night,
Yeah, KGB, I think, has succeeded as a literary venue despite so many things that should make it not a literary venue. Like, just really, whether it's...
If you want to go somewhere or you're disliked by the bartender.
I was about to say cantankerous bartenders.
You go to KGB.
I've got to say, not on Wednesdays when we have Dan and Seiji behind the bar, who are fantastic.
Yeah.
They're great.
Gotta go on Wednesdays.
But I've heard, some people think some of the bartenders at KGB can be surly. But no, Dennis Wojciech, who owns the entire building, the establishment, because it's also the Red Room above and the Crane Theatre below, and I think there's a comedy theatre below, comedy venue below that. He's great, and he's a real sort of a genuine sort of old school patron of the arts, I think, and he's a writer himself. He writes plays, and I think he genuinely does it out of a sense of love for the literary community, and it's genuinely a kind of an honor to be kind of housed there, and I feel really lucky that we've had that connection.
Well, so the actors and actresses that perform, how do you pair them with the writers? How do you figure that out? What's the process like?
I think over the years, we have a company of actors who we use, and people drop in and out of that company depending on where they are in the world, or whether they're working on stage at any one time, and whatever it might be. But we certainly have regular actors that we use for certain types of story. And I think that whenever we read a story, we have certain actors in mind, for a certain type of mood or a kind of tone. And again, over the years, it's become a fairly easy thing to kind of see, like, okay, that would be perfect for Matt, or that would be, perfect for Alice, or whoever it might be, to read. And, so that kind of shortcuts the process. There are times where, we have a submission that we're excited about, and, we have to kind of think, we don't know, exactly who the right kind of actor would be to read it. But all of the actors we work with, have had professional training. They're all great at what they do.
Yeah.
And, it's rare that I think we've cast an actor and it's not been right.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much every time we nailed it. Sometimes, I think sometimes more so than others. I know that we've had We've had actors on more than one occasion who have continued a relationship with a writer afterwards.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I think recently Olivia Killingsworth, one of our actors, read a story by a writer whose name I've now completely blanked on. I'm really sorry, and I apologize to that writer. But she read this piece, and she and the actor got together and actually turned it into a short film.
Wow.
And subsequently we've used Elizabeth for one of her other sort of pieces of writing as well that she submitted the following year. So sometimes there's just this incredible magical kind of connection that happens. And, I would never really want to kind of, list my top 10 recordings that we've done, but I certainly have some favorites in my head.
So what about submissions? First you guys are monthly, is that right?
Every other month.
Every other month. And so is it just open submissions? No,
we have themes, and it's something that we set up in London originally. The theme is always kind of there are two words with an ampersand in between the two, and that ampersand is part of our logo as well. So our most recent theme was intimacy and isolation. And so every other month there's a new theme, and we generally announce those themes at the end of the year. I was going to announce our themes for next year here right now, but which is clearly the most exciting thing to happen to the podcast ever, but we haven't agreed those themes yet, so I can't do that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, they'll be announced very soon in the new year.
That'll be in February, right?
No, our next event is in February, which is intimacy and isolation, in fact. And so the next submissions theme deadline will be around the end of February for an event in April, in fact. So, yeah.
So where can people go to find out more about submissions?
They can go to our website at liarsleaguenyc.com.
Okay.
And there's all of our submissions guidelines are there, together with, a few details about what we like and what we don't like. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it really is the case that to get an idea of what we like, read what we've published in the past.
Yeah.
And we have a full archive of all our stories, both in terms of text and recordings on our website, that anyone can listen to for free at any time. And we tend to kind of feature kind of character-driven stories that have a sense of an ending. And that it sounds really obvious to say, but I think probably along with a lot of journals and publications, we receive a lot of short stories which start out with some fantastic idea or conceit, but then sort of just trail off, fizzle out, or just don't end, and it's sort of a snapshot but without a story, a sense of story. And there's a difference. I think there's also, in addition, every journal to a certain extent has a house style, and that's based on the tastes of the editors, I think, to a certain extent. But for Liars League, and this would apply to Liars League in London as well as New York and in Portland and Hong Kong, where we also have a presence. Certain stories work well when read aloud, and certain stories don't. So a story, ironically, that is, that would seem like it's made for an actor, sometimes just doesn't, that involves a lot of dialogue, sometimes just does not work when it's read out aloud.
I tell people the same thing, like when they're submitting to read, they'll we get a lot of emails. It's like, what are you looking for, whatever. And we're pretty open, but because we're just a reading series. But what I always tell them is I'm like, you're going to get 8 to 10 minutes to read.
Right.
The best things to read are something that's kind of like a complete story that will get people in, not something that you have to have a lot of context to like drop them into it, because people are listening and sometimes people aren't the best listeners, too. So, so that's something with a complete ending I definitely agree with. Well, so we talked a lot about Liars League, and it's so wrapped up with your literary career, but I do want to shift paces a little bit and talk about you as a writer. So when did your kind of literary career, when did you start writing?
I started writing, I think, I'd say relatively late, in as much as I didn't really write at university, or, I dabbled in bits and pieces. I think, as anyone, I read English literature at university and as a degree, but here, but I I wasn't massively involved as a creative writer at that point. And it was only, I think, when I was working for an advertising agency in London, which is what I did for a long, long time, I found myself in my spare time at the agency kind of writing short stories. And I think it probably started when I got really into Raymond Carver. And I think there was something about his writing that made the process seem incredibly accessible.
Yeah.
And, and deceptively so in the case of Raymond Carver, as, I'm sure everyone knows, everyone tries to wrte like Raymond Carver.
But that's the word I'd use to describe him too, as his writing is accessible.
It is, yeah. And, and maybe that's a good thing for a lot of writers because it kind of, strips away some of the intimidating aspect. It's a good point of entry. And even if you do just write bad Raymond Carver-esque fiction, I think there's something about, you can write about, a trip to the local corner shop to buy a pint of milk or whatever it might be, and that can still seem full of meaning and significance. Yeah, so I started writing kind of these little odd short stories that were really just, I think kind of initially snapshots. And I mean, this is going to sound incredibly arrogant, but I mean, I really hadn't written very much, and I submitted a short story to a competition I'd heard of, which again, there weren't many competitions or anything like that in the UK, and this was one that was run by Canongate, the publisher in Scotland, and to a competition which was about the 7 deadly sins. I think that was the only theme, was that you must be writing about one of the 7 deadly sins. And so I wrote this story called Coveting, which was about a man who worked in a lost and found department of a railway. I think it was I think it was, he worked for the lost and found might have been the London
this
Underground or something.
Is sounding very
like
British
that.
to me.
So
for some reason.
Do you not have lost and found departments?
No, we do, but I don't know. Just that it was in like a railway station.
It was a railway station. I really forget. It was a long time ago now. And anyway, this thing was published and in this anthology, and which I really took for granted. I was like, oh, cool, excellent, great. And now I look back on it and I'm like, bloody hell, that was kind of relatively unusual, and especially right out of the gate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I then just started submitting stories to lots of places, and I kept getting published at an early stage. And I think, that kind of, it was a slightly warped introduction to.
I can already tell you're getting really uncomfortable.
I'm really uncomfortable.
Talking about yourself.
I know. I really don't like. I try not to.
Well, you won the Fish International story. What's that story about? Where can people find that?
I think it might be online. It was published in their anthology. They produce an anthology every year. And the anthology was called Feathers and Cigarettes and Other Stories. And my story was called Feathers and Cigarettes. And that story was about, I'm still incredibly fond of that story, actually. It was about a 15-year-old girl whose boyfriend breaks up with her, and then she goes around to her friend's house, steals some money, does some coke, and then throws a brick through her now ex-boyfriend's window. That's it. It was kind of written in the first person.
Man, is that only in print?
I think it might be online as well. I think you might be able to
find it
online. Yeah, and it was this sort of very sort of almost train of thought type kind of story written in her language, and the way that a 15-year-old at the time would speak. And I remember they called me up because they couldn't believe a man had written it, and they wanted to make sure that I was who I said I was.
Oh.
And yeah, apparently there was some debate as to whether or not I should. I don't know. I can't remember. It was a while ago. But
they thought you were actually a 15-year-old girl.
I don't know what they thought and why they would assume that somebody would want to impersonate a man, a 30-something-year-old man or whatever it was at the time. So that was published, and that was the thing that somebody turned into a short film as well.
Well, it sounds like that. Although you're uncomfortable talking about yourselves, you're very comfortable in the short story form, and
I think that's been accidental. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I often, I think, as many writers do, I don't like calling myself, I guess I call myself a writer, because it's sort of what I've done all my life. And, it's even as a copywriter in advertising, that's what I did. And, writer is kind of how I make a living, as it were. But I still think of there as being jump from being a writer to being an author. You know, I don't know why. And so shorts,
because it's a book versus a short story.
Versus a short story. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, and I've never really kind of seen myself as a short story writer, even though that's predominantly what I've published.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I've published a lot of short stories sort of in various places. And, you know, short stories are great because, you know, you can get them out of your system quickly and get them out there. And if they don't go anywhere, if nobody wants to publish them, then it's not the end of the world. But I've always been massively intimidated by, you know, writing anything longer because, you know, it just seems like such a huge investment of time. And for that, you know, to spend, you know, years of your life writing a novel.
And then potentially not to go somewhere. Yeah.
It just seems tragic to me. And, you know, I know that, you know, no risk, no reward and everything like that.
Sure.
But yeah, so I've kind of really hesitated to kind of get too involved with anything longer form. I am working on a novel at the moment, but I've said that on so many occasions, and you know, I definitely don't want to talk about that.
Fair enough.
I'm happy to talk about novels that I've worked on that haven't come about, like failed novels. There should be a podcast entirely devoted to writers talking about
that would be a good
novels
podcast.
That they either started and never finished, or that they finished and never went anywhere, or that they only got into the planning stages of and that stayed with them for a while. And
I do agree that writers should talk more about rejection. We do in this kind of like abstract form, like, oh, got a rejection. And like they talk more about like what the editor said in the rejection letter, but like...
Right, because that's sometimes the only form of validation you get.
Yeah, but actually like real rejection and what that looks like. I think like if people were a lot more honest about that. I mean, everybody's been rejected.
They are, yeah.
So many times.
Of course. I mean, I think there's a great analogy, which is, you know, being a writer and expecting not to get, you know, to be rejected is like being a boxer and expecting not to get hit.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely feel that, but it takes some time to kind of wrap your head around that and not to take it personally. You know, I think that today it's easier than ever to be rejected in a good way. You know, like we have things like Submittable and, you know, that just make it easy to fire things off. And you can kind of watch this kind of long list of, you know, submissions get slowly rejected.
I'm very involved with like a lot of younger artists because of my training program. And then like I just have such a close connection with Sarah Lawrence. Like I'm up there all the time. And so I'm constantly meeting like writers who are like newer into the literary scene and like just starting to submit things and like how brokenhearted they get after those first couple of rejections. And I'm like, just submit about 100 more times.
Right.
And then come talk to me and see how you feel.
Right,
like, it just becomes routine after a while. You're just like, okay, whatever. Yeah.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think it's even, I mean, even though it's routine, like, you know, I still feel a sting at times when I kind of submit a story somewhere and I think, oh, they're definitely going to publish it. Yeah. And they definitely don't want to publish it. Yeah. And more than that, it's not even a nice rejection. It's just a form rejection.
Oh, God. I try not to even say that to myself anymore. Like, they're definitely going to want this because that's like more than likely that's the place that gives you that form rejection.
Form rejections are shit. I mean, I think that I try not to... I know why they exist. You know, I've worked with Submittable on the editor side as well as on the writer side before. And, you know, having worked I worked briefly with Litro, I was fiction editor for Litro for a year. And so we used Submittable there. And, you know, we were dealing with huge numbers of submissions. Yeah. And it just became the easiest thing to do was to, you know, do batch rejections. And, you know, you had to do it. Yeah. And for that reason, I try really hard with Liars League. I try to put at least something in with every rejection that explains what we liked about the piece or why we're rejecting it. Yeah. Just to give the writers a kind of a sense of closure. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I mean it genuinely because I know what it feels like to kind of get this kind of anonymous rejection back from someone anonymous. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are times with Liars League where it's easier to kind of write that that rejection letter because, you know, you have genuine criticism and you know, in a good way, you can say like, look, we really love what you were doing with this character, but we just felt that the ending let it down, or, you know, that, you know, it took a strange turn in the third act or whatever it might be. But sometimes it's, you know, it's sometimes it is genuinely hard to find the time to kind of reject a lot of pieces. I mean, for our most recent submissions deadline, we had hundreds of submissions, and that's something that's weird. I still, to this day, I don't understand why some themes get a lot of submissions and others don't. And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the time of year.
Yeah.
It's really...
That was my first question in my head. I was like, I wonder if it's the time of year, but no.
No, it's not. And, you know, I often think maybe it's that simply because, like, in summer, nobody wants to write because you're out kind of sitting in the sun or lying on the beach or whatever. But yeah, no, some themes really seem to resonate. And, you know, intimacy and isolation really, really did this past month. So, yeah, I was kind of completely overwhelmed, you know, by all the submissions we had. So that might impact on whether or not we're able to kind of offer personal rejections. I'd love to do it every time, but it just becomes a time.
It's hard, yeah.
thing, yeah.
No, we definitely feel that with our... You know, we don't really advertise that we are open for submissions because we want them on a rolling basis and we want them to be manageable.
Yeah, sure.
And we're reading novels, you know, not
of course.
So. But we also want to send out personalized rejections, and that's not always possible with everything that you get. Like sometimes it's just like, you know what, this person didn't even take the time to like put their contact information in, and you know, it's written in 8 different fonts. So I think it's okay to have a form rejection here. Right. But for the most part, we try to give like something like, and what we've heard back from writers is that, you know, this is the first feedback they've really gotten, and they didn't know what wasn't working and like why it wasn't getting picked up. They just kept being told no. Yeah. Without knowing why. And so, you know, hopefully some of them took our feedback positively and went and worked on their stuff, and hopefully it makes it better. You know?
Yeah. No, it can be incredibly gratifying to people, you know, to kind of have that sense of something that they can do about a rejection, because otherwise, you know, there just isn't. There's just a general kind of faith that you have to have in your own writing that at some point somebody will want to publish a story. But I've definitely had stories that have been consistently rejected, and I still to this day, I'm not entirely sure why, because they seem consistent with other things I've written. But it's hard to tell.
No. Well, so speaking of writing and everything, would you be willing to read some of your writing for us?
I'd be happy to read some of my writing. Anything to avoid talking about myself.
Fair enough.
Yeah, sure. I'll read a section from a short story that was published recently in a online magazine called Parhelion, and the story's called 20 Acres of Taylor Swift. And I'm not going to read from the start of it. I'm going to read sort of midway through. And I guess what you need to know is that you're
a huge Taylor Swift fan.
I am actually a huge Taylor Swift fan.
Good to know.
I am an unapologetic Taylor Swift fan, which I can go into at great lengths. I don't know why. It's actually started out as kind of an in-joke, I think, at one point. And then it somehow kind of metastasized into
That's
truth,
how my love of Britney Spears started.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Excellent. Metastasized, is that the right word?
Yep.
I don't know. Okay, well, say it is.
Good. We're equating your love for Taylor Swift to a cancer.
That's terrible. No, that's
metastasized.
No, that's definitely not the word I meant to use then. Oh, God, that's awful. Anyway, okay, we'll go with that. Yes, so I do love Taylor Swift. Yeah, so what you need to know is that the narrator has stopped for lunch at a kind of a big farm. He's on a road trip and he stopped for lunch at a big farm, and it's a farm where they have a corn maze. And I don't know, have you ever been in a corn maze?
I don't think I've ever actually been in one, no.
So corn mazes they're around the country normally in the fall, and it is what it sounds like. It's just a giant labyrinth cut into a field of corn, right. But they're often done in interesting shapes, you know, and sometimes they're sponsored, and often, you know, to entice people along, they'll be done in some sort of fashionable shape, like in the shape of Harry Potter, or in the shape of, I don't know, like SpongeBob SquarePants or whatever it might be. And anyway, and so this particular story is set, this farm he goes to, there's a giant corn maze, and it's in the shape of Taylor Swift's head. So he's had lunch and he's got some time to kill, and he decides to go into the corn maze. Okay. So that's how the story starts. So I'll pick up at that point. Outside, there are signs pointing towards the start of the maze, though the cornfield itself is easy enough to find, a 10-foot wall of dusty green stalks that run the entire length of one side of the farmyard and beyond. The entrance is marked by a white gazebo and a Chevy pickup, which, as far as I can tell, is positioned at the base of Taylor Swift's neck. A life-size cutout of Taylor Swift in cocktail dress and high heels is accompanied by a cheerful sign wishing maze walkers good luck, reminding us that there's no drinking, smoking, cussing, or cutting through the corn. Beneath the shade of the gazebo, a man in an orange tabard the color of a pumpkin is selling bottles of water and toffee apples. I buy some water, show my badge, and after a cursory glance at a map of the maze that hangs from one edge of the gazebo, I head into the corn. It's quiet inside. The rows of corn seem to mute the noise from the rest of the farm, so there's only the sound of my footsteps on the hard-baked path and the rustle of leaves in the wind, together with the occasional distant wail of the pumpkin cannon. As it turns out, cutting through the corn would be next to impossible. The stalks are thick and solid, and the rows have been so densely planted you could thrust your arms into the leaves and lose sight of your hands. The corn is so tall that even though the path is wide enough to walk two abreast, in places it feels more like walking through a tunnel. Within 10 minutes, I'm regretting not buying a map. Well, after half an hour, I hate the corn, the farm, Baxter Chevy, and especially Taylor fucking Swift. The worn-out sneakers I'm wearing aren't up to the distance I'm evidently now obliged to walk. I've finished the water, and since I hadn't thought to wear sunscreen, I can feel the back of my neck beginning to burn. I walked a hedge maze once, but the corn maze is very different. The stretches of path that make up the waves of Taylor's hair or the contours of her face are long and entirely featureless, apart from the occasional signpost offering directional clues, though since these rely on a knowledge of Taylor Swift's life and times, they don't help me at all. I start listening out for other voices, hoping to run into someone with a map so at the very least I can orient myself, but all I can hear is the pumpkin siren and the white noise of the corn. There had been at most 20 cars parked in the field with me when I arrived, and I'd seen at least a dozen other families or couples in the farmyard while I was there, so I guess there are somewhere between 10 and 20 other people along with me in the maze. Between 10 and 20 people in 20 acres of Taylor Swift. I'm prepared to humiliate myself with a phone call for help, but since my phone has no reception, that's not an option. From my cursory glance at the map, I remember there's an observation platform somewhere in the middle of Taylor's forehead, but until it comes into view, I've only the vaguest of ideas where I am. I estimate that I've walked at least a mile, maybe 2, of Taylor, and I'm at a junction somewhere in the region of her right ear when I turn a lobe and find a girl in a light blue dress kneeling on the ground facing a wall of corn. She's 5, I guess, maybe 6, though to be honest I find it hard to tell with kids. Her hands are clasped in prayer, and her head is bowed, her blonde hair falling down around her face. I look around, sure that there will be someone else nearby, but there's no one in sight. My first instinct is to turn and walk in the opposite direction, not to disturb her, a baby bird fallen from the nest. But there's also a part of me that's relieved I'm not alone, so I decide to say something. "Hello," I say. She looks up at me, her eyes wide, her hands still pressed together, silent. I can see she's been crying. "Are you okay?" I say. "Are you lost?" The girl stands up, her knees dirty from the ground where she'd been kneeling, and nods slowly. "I was praying," she says. "Okay," I say. "Do you know where your mom is?" "No," she says. "I was running and I got lost." I look around again, hoping to see the mother appear along one of the pathways, wild with worry, but there's still no sign that we're anything other than alone. "Do you have a map?" I say. "Do you know where you are?" She shakes her head. "Okay," I say. "Do you know which way your mommy went?" She shakes her head again. I'm torn between looking for the girl's mother and risking moving further away from her, or staying put in the hope that someone eventually comes looking. After another glance along the path, I decide to take a chance. "What's your name?" I ask. "Bethany," she says. "That's a pretty name," I say, because it's the kind of thing I've heard people saying to small children. "Okay, Bethany, Should we try and find your mommy? This time she nods. Okay, I say. Let's go this way. I decide to walk in the same direction in which I'd been heading, and she follows close behind. My phone is still useless, and I think about shouting out for help, but I don't want to scare Bethany, and besides, I'm still expecting to find her mother any second. But after a few minutes of walking and several twists and turns, I'm regretting my decision to move away from where I'd found her. I think about hacking my way through the corn, though I have no idea in which direction to go, even if I can clear a path, which still looks impossible. And since dragging a 5 or 6-year-old through with me will probably prove harder than walking the long way round, I abandon the thought. Jesus, I say. I hear Bethany gasp, an exaggerated intake of breath. I turn, and she has stopped behind me, and is actually holding one hand over her open mouth, staring at me, her eyes wide again. You took the Lord's name in vain, she whispers. Oh, I say. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You need to ask for forgiveness, she says, and I can see from the look on her face that she's genuinely concerned. Well, I say, forgive me. No, she says, you gotta ask Jesus. Okay, I say, and I turn my face to the sky. Sorry, Jesus. Sorry. She nods, satisfied. We walk on for a while longer, on shorter paths, following what I'm hoping are the inner lines of Taylor's face, until we come to a large oval clearing. I guess that we're standing in one of her eyes, but it's a dead end. I walk to where Taylor's pupil would be I walk to where Taylor's pupil would be to see if I can see anything with the additional clearance the cornea affords, but the corn is still too high. We'll try another way, I say, and then, in case Bethany's having doubts, I add, this is fun, right? Do you like mazes? No, Bethany says. Yeah, I say. Me neither. Stop there.
My favorite phrase in that was, I turn a lobe.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had from describing the kind of like anatomy of specifically Taylor Swift's head as you're walking through it. Yeah.
Oh, that was a really fun story. Thank you. I gotta read the rest now. I have it pulled up actually when I was doing my research on you and poking through all your things. I found that story and I was like, oh, I'm excited. You decided to read part of that. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, you may be uncomfortable talking about yourself, but you have a very lovely podcast and reading voice. So.
Oh, thanks very much.
I very much enjoyed. That was like a bedtime story for me.
I rarely read anything at Liars League, I have to say. I think I've done it once. I've actually read somebody else's story when one of our actors dropped out, and the story itself called for an English accent.
Oh,
and so I stepped in. But yeah, again, I wasn't massively comfortable doing it. So.
It's funny. I know a lot of curators who feel that way too. I also do very few readings anymore because I'm just like, I host one monthly. I don't need to read my own work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like reading my own work. I don't know why. I don't mind that. It's reading other people's, I think, can sometimes be. But yeah, and I don't mind hosting it. I enjoy that. But there's something about certainly talking about myself. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on tonight.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Happy that we finally got to sit down and have like this conversation and this time together.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being the first guest of 2020 for us too. So
I'm super excited about 2020. Yeah.
What's your resolution?
That's a really good question. I think I'm going to kind of try and get back to an earlier resolution from last year, which is not to bring my phone into the bedroom with me.
Oof. Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah, it's quite difficult if you can manage it, but I think it's good. It's an achievable resolution.
That's my alarm, so.
Yeah, I've actually bought an alarm clock.
Because, for that reason.
Yeah, for that reason. Yeah, I kind of crumbled at some point and got back into the habit of having my phone in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and push that away again.
Fair enough.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Animal Riot Press or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 45th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with me, your host, Katie Rainey, and featuring Andrew Lloyd-Jones. Our transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay. This episode was cut by our podcast assistant, Dylan Thomas, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
click work, yes sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as a fern.